Joe Rogan blasts the little communist ferret. But Pope Francis, he's off to Canada to apologize for the divine commission to baptize all nations. But this guy says, hang on a minute, they're both dead wrong. It's all fake news, and the residential schools were the best thing that ever happened to him. So, who's telling the truth?
The Vatican has officially announced that Pope Francis will travel to Canada from July 24th to the 30th. The Pope was formally invited to visit Canada by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in 2017 to apologize to Indigenous communities for the Church's role in operating residential schools.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Michael Madden. This is the Remnant Underground. The Pope and the Ferret. Now there's a match made in hell, wouldn't you say?
As a Catholic, I am deeply disappointed.
Those poor people up in Canada. Can you imagine knowing that guy's the warden, that he's in charge?
Oh, we've got Biden.
No, I'd rather have Biden. I'd rather have Joey Biden. What, now he's got COVID and he's got cancer and he's not able to speak at all anymore.
That's why I and so damn many other people I grew up have cancer.
I'd still prefer to have Joey Biden than the little ferret up in Canada. I mean, Joe Rogan this past week absolutely nailed it.
Canada's communist. They got to get rid of that guy. And then during the pandemic, I'm like, oh, you're a dictator. Yeah, he's gross. He's a sketchy guy.
That pretty much sums it up. But now it's time for Francis to drag the Catholic Church through the mud one more time. Because after all, the little ferret wants him to.
I have spoken personally, directly, with His Holiness Pope Francis to impress upon him how important it is, not just that he makes an apology, but that he makes an apology to Indigenous Canadians on Canadian soil.
All right, so let's just talk about it. I know nobody else is talking about this because you're not allowed to talk about this, but let's talk about this whole residential school thing this time. We had a show on this a while ago. And I realize it's racist. It's absolutely racist to ask any questions about what's really going on because they're Indigenous peoples. And so you have no right to ask any questions. It's racist. Just shut up and accept the narrative spoon-fed to you on TV, right? Just like COVID was, Ukraine, climate emergency, and everything else. Just accept the narrative. Don't ask any questions. Basically, it goes something like this. This is what you need to know. Residential schools were run by people who kill children. Catholic priests ran some of those residential schools. Therefore, all Catholic priests killed children. That's basically it. That's all you need to know. And now the Pope is off to Canada to confirm that ridiculous syllogism. You can say, well, he's not doing that. There were some problems up there. This is how Francis always works. How Francis always works. Okay, atheists can go to heaven. Who am I to judge? Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, of course, there's much more to it. But the world's only half paying attention to Francis. No, the world's not half paying attention. The world's barely paying attention to Francis anymore. And all they see is the headline. Pope says atheists go to heaven. Pope says, Catholic missionaries in Canada were killing and eating children. Went up there to apologize. Yeah, whatever. That's what the Vatican, in my opinion, is counting on. But let me be clear. I don't know what happened up in those schools, and I bet you don't either, over and above what they told you on TV, right? And I'm certainly not here to say that there was never any abuse up in those schools. The last residential Canadian school having closed in the 1990s, I would not go out on that limb for any reason. But I think that maybe we can all admit that politics has certainly slipped into this, right? I think we can all admit that Francis is really eager as he's shutting down the Latin Mass, as he's shutting down the religious life. He's more than happy to go to Canada for one of these high-profile roadshows of his to undermine the rigid missionary spirit of the Catholic Church, up in Canada. Well, of course, that's what he would want to do. He's not going to clarify anything up there. And just as he and Trudeau are eager to blame the Catholic Church for all of this, we need to keep in mind that the alleged victims up in Canada, the Indigenous, they're just as critical of the Canadian government, which they claim now. They got to pay attention to this. There's so much more to this story. The victims, the supposed, alleged, whatever you want to call it, the victims of the residential schools are up there right now claiming that there was a cover-up, abuse of power in the government because the government doesn't want to pay the compensation to the victims. As you start, peeling this onion back, you realize there's a lot more to this story. And so don't forget, every one of these Indigenous victims now is legally entitled to compensation.
Since Canada started compensating survivors of Indian residential schools, nearly 40,000 claims have been approved. The payout has been more than $3 billion.
If they can prove abuse. So it's pretty easy to see that if you have a chance to make millions of dollars having gone to one of those schools, and maybe you just didn't like the fact that they were teaching you catechism, maybe you didn't like the fact they were keep teaching you, your times tables and your catechism question, and they were tough, and they made you memorize. Maybe you think that was kind of abusive, especially since now you're worshiping the Great Spirit God, and the Son, or whatever it is, not Jesus Christ anymore, and the nuns were telling you the Catholic position on theology on God. Now you think, well, I'm abused. So all I got to do is trot on down to City Hall and claim that was abuse to get a big taste of cash, Trudeau cash up there. Abuse includes, especially right now, teaching Christianity to the Indigenous children. That's abuse. You see, that's how they're defining abuse now. They're throwing sexual abuse and eating the kids, that comes later. The number one thing they're upset about, these activists, is Christianity being taught to the Indigenous children. Period. That's what they're ticked about. So all I'm trying to point out here, as we get ready now for this papal visit, Francis is going to make a big show up in Canada. Thank goodness he's vaccinated. I guess they'll let him in. They're not letting those people in. They're locking their own country down. The whole world up there is just, the Canadians, I feel so bad for them.
Current policy, though, is that we are supposed to issue you a quarantine order at that point. So that's what I'm going to have to do then today. So,
but I'm vaccinated. Isn't that just for unvaccinated?
Well, it comes down to this is what I have to do.
I'm getting upset. This is ridiculous. This is insane. I shouldn't have to go through this. No Canadian should. Just because I don't want to put an app on my phone.
But here comes Francis waltzing in to worry about something that happened 80 years ago up in the frozen tundra of Canada, while all the Canadians are like, water, let me leave let me go visit grandma. They have real problems. They have real shortages. Here comes Francis. Now the reality is, again, Francis, this story is all over the place. In other words, in the recent years, you've seen that the need for them to introduce serious fake news to make this thing fly.
Last year, the ABC reported shocking claims. The remains of 215 children had been found at the Kamloops Indian Residential School in Canada and were now being identified. Indigenous children allegedly dumped in unmarked graves at a Catholic school, stolen children that some activists claimed were murdered. Well, in Canada, those claims proved explosive. Protesters burned down a number of churches, not just Catholic ones. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, that woke flake, didn't question a word of this story. He said it actually showed a dark and shameful chapter in Canadian history, told the Catholic Church to step up. But now it seems the so-called bodies detected by this activist are just radar findings of tree roots and other soil disturbances. In fact, you can find a number of prominent Canadian Indians praising this school, including the first female chief in Canada's Northwest Territories, who said the years there were the best of her life. So now what? Do the statues go back up? Does the Prime Minister apologise for promoting what may in fact be a hoax and a smear of the Catholic Church? And does the ABC at least correct the record and admit that this story of Catholic horror was as dodgy as its smears of Cardinal George Pell?
Why is Pope Francis then lending the full weight of his office to this dodgy bit of fake news? That they're up there killing kids and barely... Why is he doing this? And by the way, is he going to say anything? We're talking 3-4 days from now. This whole show, the road show, is going to start. Is he going to say anything at all about the thousands and thousands of nuns and priests who had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with abusing anyone? Did they get a pass? Or are they all just going to be guilty? Because I know what's going to happen. Want a prediction? Want a prophecy? I'm not going to say anything. He's just going to be vague, and he's going to allow the press to run with it. The Catholic Church for 100 and so many years was basically murdering and eating children in Canada, and now the Pope's apologizing for it. That's all the people at the water cooler are going to come away with. And so the question is anyone actually interested in the truth? I think this audience is. I sure hope so, because we've had enough of this Francis Roadshow, haven't we? Is anyone interested in the truth? Is anyone being allowed to see the truth? Did you know right now out on the internet, there's a 1962 documentary called The Eyes of Children, Life in a Residential School, which is being pulled down from social media platforms. Suddenly 404, can't see it. Why not?
In the name of the Father, Our Lady of Good Studies.
Is everyone ready now to hear a nice story about Christmas? Because very, very soon now, it's going to be Christmas, and we want to get all ready for Christmas.
But further south, they can grow another cereal crop, which is, what is it the Chinese grow?
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Walk across here. Don't fall over that. Keep going. You're going to go right back on the game, girl.
I sure like to be a sister, but I don't know if I'll make it.
Why do you feel you'd like to be a sister?
Well, so I could help the people in the world and teach them about God and all.
I know what you're going to say. Well, yeah, but that could be propaganda. Well, of course it could be. Maybe that's all it is. Or maybe it was just a guy up there running a camera at these residential schools to see what was going on, you know? But I got to tell you, I went to a Catholic school. It looked a bit like that. It wasn't a boarding school, thank goodness. I'm not a big fan of boarding schools, period. But then again, I don't live in the frozen tundra of the Canadian bush either. And if I lived up there, I might be looking for something, someplace to put my kids where they could be educated. That's what we're talking about here. People that are living in pretty remote spots. And we're at schools a half a block away. But in any case, the school that I went to looked a lot like what we just saw. But lately, as you all know, those of you who went to Catholic school, now everywhere you look, they're telling us that our nuns, too, were sexually repressed. Every one of them. They were abusive. They were sick. They were perverse. You know what they were doing? They were eating kids for lunch. We're hearing this all over the place. And everybody's like, yeah, it must have been that way. It's weird because Sister Mary, I don't remember anything like that going on. That's my story. I don't remember any of that going on. I didn't see any of that going through Catholic grade school. It's funny because the whole time, what we did see going through, actually living through Catholic schools, was no-nonsense sisters, beautiful women who had a vocation to teach. They gave solid education to hundreds of thousands of Americans.
It took who I was and where I came from to make me who I am. For that, I have to thank my late parents, Arthur and Amelia Neville. They, along with the nuns at St. Monica's Catholic School, especially Sister Damien, taught me morals and guidance. My Catholic upbringing helped me in some dark times. One dark night, I remembered a poem I had to memorize and recite in front of the class in maybe the 5th grade. Later, I put music to it and recorded it. The poem was, "Lovely lady dressed in blue, teach me how to pray."
That's what I remember. I remember discipline. I remember formation. I remember catechism. Not the ruler. Never saw the ruler thing either. You know, in fact, Walter, I think we've got a little... Here's me in 1975. I'm at St. Agnes Grade School in St. Paul, which even at that point, it's pretty late, but they were very conservative, St. Agnes was, still chock full of nuns. But I'm supposed to just accept the media's narrative that they were all sexual perverts, right? Just like up in Canada. They were all sexual perverts, rapists, child eaters. But another funny thing about all that, and again, were there some crazy nuns? Oh my gosh, yeah, we had a couple nuns who were a little bit woohoo, a little bit out there. That's because it's called life, and everybody in every field, you're going to see people who are incredible, who are awesome, who are the best, and then you're going to see some that are a bit, a little bit odd. So I'm not here to say all the nuns were, perfect, and Sister Mary Chocolate didn't exist. Sister Mary Chocolate did exist, and she was always a little odd. But my point is, most of them, the vast majority of them, did yeoman's labor for this country, for families, for the community, for souls, for people. That's how we grew up with these people. And it was before the media campaign, all of this, everything I'm talking about, before the media campaign kicked into high gear, the campaign to turn all Catholic nuns into the predators. Before you had all that, well, you had things like the Sisters of Selma. Do you remember them?
The St. Louis Archdiocese answered an appeal from Dr. Martin Luther King to join a voting rights march in Selma. 51 people made the trip, including 6 nuns.
Wow. Do you mean to tell me that Catholic nuns weren't always just a bunch of racists? Remember that chubby guy from Catholic Charities? My church has always been a racist church. Remember that guy? We did a show on him.
My Catholic Church and my Catholic Charities organization is racist. How could they not be? Our Catholic faith tradition was built on the premise that a baby born in a manger in the Middle East was a white baby.
Jesus was a white baby? Can you believe this clown?
Whatever you think of the civil rights movement, that's not the point. The point is that in 1965, Catholic nuns in America were so respected that they were put front and center in things like civil rights marches to give it legitimacy. In other words, Sister Freddie Krueger hadn't appeared on the scene quite yet when this was going on.
We are here from St. Louis to demonstrate, to witness our love for our fellow citizens in Selma.
With priests by their sides, Sister Ebo and the other nuns marched down a Selma street.
It makes you kind of wonder, doesn't it? When did Sister Freddie Krueger and Sister Michael Myers, when did they all become serial killing, psycho rapists, sexual perverts? When was that? Was that like in the 70s then, 80s? Or was it just invented in the last 10, 15 years because it's fun? Well, you say, but those penguins, man, they were forcing their religion and their morality on children. That's sick. To which I say, yes, and certainly is nice that nothing like that is happening today.
You talk about critical race theory, which is pretty much going to be teaching kids how to hate each other.
You must admit how uncomfortable it will be to be characterized just by your skin color on the first day of school.
Critical race theory is teaching that white people are bad. That's not true. That would teach my daughter that her mother is evil.
How do I have 2 medical degrees if I'm sitting here oppressed?
Give me the old, beautiful penguins any day. And yes, I do use the expression penguins with affection, but give me the old penguins any day. Like Indigenous parents, in fact, 75 years ago, my wife and I were quite happy to have that our children have access to a homeschool co-op run by the Daughters of the Works of Mercy. We'll throw some pictures up on the screen of that. And I just can't help when I look at what's happening up in Canada and all the fake news floating all over the place. What if most of the Indigenous parents felt, as we do, as my wife and I do, that the sisters offered their children a better chance in life? Because you know what? That's what I suspect was going on. There weren't a lot of opportunities up there. The government, in cooperation with several different religions, not just Catholics, set up a program to help educate the Indigenous people. Oh my gosh, was that really such a crime? There are some countries where rather than assimilating, they simply wipe out the Indigenous peoples. In fact, that kind of happened down here in the States in a way, when you think of what happened in the treaties that were broken down here. In Canada, they brought people in from all over the world to go live out there in the frozen tundra and teach kids how to read and write and something about God. And this is a crime that we need to decry now? Why? Because a lot of parents then, a lot of Indigenous parents, it's racist to suggest that Indigenous parents did not feel this way, that they did not feel that this was something to take advantage of, people who had come to educate, to provide a service. It's racist To say, oh, all they wanted to do was just, forget education. They just wanted to learn how to, gut deer and make leather things. You know what I mean? No, they were moving away from that sort of nomadic lifestyle by that point, middle of the 20th century, and the kids were being educated. And they wanted their children there. Does that mean there were never any abuses? No, that's not what we're talking about. See, the whole system is being decried. Francis is going to go apologize for the entire system. And wouldn't it be fun, once again, to ask a few questions? Because there are certainly plenty of witnesses out there among the tribes, among the Indigenous peoples of Canada, who are wanting to tell the other side of the story.
Concert pianist, librettist, novelist, and playwright, Thompson Highway's life has taken him from the trap lines of northern Manitoba to the stages of the world. His plays are studied at universities all over North America, and he has almost single-handedly created a vibrant and viable native theatre in Canada.
I would think that your life, your adult life, would be more informed by what was probably the dichotomy of your early years, the more exaggerated extremes, I would think, than most people would have. Idyllic to start with, certainly less than idyllic as it became later when you were in a residential school.
Oh, that's a mistake.
Is that right?
The residential school experience for me was a fantastic experience.
Is that right?
So much of that is reported, that's skewed. It's not quite right. They don't have the whole picture. There was a lot of us who had positive experiences at the native residential school.
But I've got to say, surprised when you say that the residential experience was a good one for you.
Yeah, it was. I learned how to speak English.
Yeah.
I learned how to play the piano.
That started at residential school, the piano thing.
Oh, yeah.
Why doesn't he get to tell his side of the story? Plenty of those people up there. None of them get to be heard, though. They don't have a voice because it doesn't fit the narrative. I took my kids up to Lake Superior in Minnesota the other day. And I came across the Church of St. Francis Xavier, where for 200 years, from 1700 something to the 1900s, missionaries from Canada braved extreme hardship to minister to the Ojibwe communities up on Lake Superior. The owner of this church walked around with a camera, was so impressed. This little church that you see on the screen right now was founded as a Jesuit mission from Fort William, Ontario, Canada, in 1855. Now today it's just a museum, but the museum makes it really clear that the thing that brought the community up there, both the settlers and the Ojibwe and the other tribes, what brought them together was this little church. The community surrounding it thrived because of this little church, because of the Canadian priests, because of the Latin Mass. We're going to do a little documentary on some of these places, in fact. They're dotting the North Shore of Minnesota up into Canada. And I paged through, ironically enough, a Missale Romanum on the altar there in that little church. I checked the tabernacle, and guess what? Ciborium, still there. And I want to, just for the sake of justice, natural justice, draw your attention to the fact that our country and Canada were founded by people like this, who were doing this, who knew how to love and get along with the tribes, who had a desire to educate and to feed people who didn't have it very, very easy. And in a minute, I'm going to show you a video of how tough it was. And to teach them about Jesus Christ. These are Canadian missionaries who built this church, we're on the screen right now. They endured hardships like you can't imagine. The Minnesota winters on Lake Superior, Gitche Gumee, the winds off the lake, you imagine living up there in the middle of winter? And they did it because they wanted to educate, feed, and catechize the Ojibwe. You're going to apologize for that too, Francis? You're going to apologize for the whole thing? You're going to apologize for the entire divine mandate of our Lord to go out and convert all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy? Is that what you're going to do, Francis? On your little road show? An estimated 1/3 of Canada's Indigenous children spent at least some time in these residential schools from the 1880s through the 1960s. But what they're not going to tell you is that those schools were the only avenue available to Indigenous children.
I mean, I was up on the Manitoba-Nunavut border where the nearest piano was like, 300 miles away. So I never really got a chance to start until I was 11.
So in residential school, that was something that
there was a piano. There was a piano there in one of the rooms, and I started to teach myself. And there was a little old nun. It was run by 12 nuns, 3 priests, and 3 brothers. And this little old nun picked me up as a student, and I started learning.
And Indian parents were the first to appreciate the opportunity.
They tried to educate us. They made mistakes, but they tried.
Now, the activists say that the Indigenous kids were abused in every way. They were forced, for example, to attend those schools. Well, think about that for a second. All Canadian children after 1910 would have been forced to attend schools. Because after 1910, that was when most of the provinces introduced compulsory school legislation. I could say the same thing about the Catholic school I went to. We were forced to go there because you couldn't just sit home in those days and not go to school. You see how easy it is to create a narrative that's much more hideous than the reality, especially if you have a deep-seated anti-Christian bias. You're beginning to see what's going on here? Beginning to be a little bit concerned about what Francis is going to do up there in a couple of days? Is there going to be any mention from the Pope, again, about these priests and these beautiful nuns who left everything behind, left their homes? Well, just for a second, ask yourself, what were they doing up there? Why would they want to go there? Why would anyone want to go up there and live there and do that with your life? They left their homes, moved to Canada to live in this frozen tundra, to try to give their best to educate Indigenous peoples in accordance with a government program. Was it all perfect? No, I doubt it. Were they heroes? Well, I'll take them any day over what the woke flakes in Canada are doing right now to the kids.
Drag Kids, it's a feature documentary following 4 preteen drag queens as they kind of pursue their passion for drag in their hometowns. And they're from Vancouver, Montreal, Spain, and Missouri. And then they all come together for one big group show at Pride Montreal. It's an incredible outlet for self-expression.
Yeah, well, that's just fine. The real villains here are the Catholic priests and the nuns. Of the past, of course, long since dead. They can't defend themselves. Heck, even the Indigenous language was under attack by these evil Catholic priests, so say the activists up there. Is that right? Yeah, no, it's not right. It's wrong. The historical records have it exactly the other way around. 2/3 of the residential schools were administered by the Oblate Fathers, who, in fact, wait for it, they studied and learned the native languages. And then guess what they did? They wrote them down in dictionaries and in grammars that are still used to this day. That's what they actually did. They preached the gospel in the indigenous languages, thus helping preserve those languages, not trying to wipe them out, trying to preserve them. And at the same time, give these native peoples the truth of Jesus Christ. And you can say, well, I don't like Jesus Christ. I'm not a Christian. It's not right. Well, that's what they were there for. That's what they were respected for. And the government of Canada acknowledged that they could help do this for the Indigenous peoples. You look at a map right now of Western Canada, what do you see? Countless towns, rivers, and lakes named after those Oblate Fathers who built the hospitals, the schools, the churches, the towns all over Canada. When they weren't raping and eating Indian kids, that's what they were doing. Building towns, building hospitals. And then their institutions, their Canadian institutions, and their missionary work, which was world famous by that point, became the basis for a Canadian Catholic missionary outreach throughout the entire world. Is Francis going to apologize for that? Mustn't have proselytism after all. Is Francis even going to mention any of the heroic efforts that went into this process, this project to bring Christ to the peoples of Canada? Will he remind anyone of what these priests actually went through? Let's show a little bit of this documentary and watch it and ask yourself, this is an example of one of the priests who Justin Trudeau is accusing of being a racist, rapist, hating son of a gun. But here's what he actually looked like.
Et mes tantes avaient choisi chacune son missionnaire. Et on m'a demandé, t'aimes ça écrire, toi, Paul? Pourquoi est-ce que tu prendrais pas ton missionnaire, toi aussi? Alors, on m'a donné le père André Goussard, qui était un Belge, qui était au Nunavut, dans des missions très éloignées. et qui était très solitaire.
Mission here was not only teaching religion. They have to work to survive. They have to go seal hunting. They have to fish to survive. First, they live in igloo, just like the rest of the people in the community, for the sake of converting people.
Quand on rentrait là comme missionnaire, on voyait cette misère-là. Pour moi, je ne pouvais pas parler aux gens sans faire quelque chose pour améliorer la situation, faire un monde meilleur. Il avait construit une maison là, en roche, le Père Henri. Et je couchais dans le toit, sur des pots de caribou.
Il me racontait, dans ce temps-là, les enfants étaient envoyés dans des écoles et ils revenaient passer l'été chez leurs parents. Et lui ramenait les enfants. Alors, on est parti de Baker Lake, 5 pour l'île de King William.
Parce que le temps était mauvais, on atterrissait parce que c'était sur ski, le petit avion de Norseman. Ça nous prenait 3 jours par avion pour arriver à Joe Haven.
Le père du liard à Gary Lake est mort en octobre dernier, perdu dans une poudrerie à quelques milles de sa mission. Ça, c'était déjà quelque chose qui brisait le cœur.
I'm glad that Andrew Gustave has worked in this community. He leaves a very fond, strong memory in my heart anyway. I learned a lot from Andrew Gustave, not only as a priest, man of God, but as a human being.
But according to Francis, this is just another example of a racist colonialist. Because all of these heroes of the past who can no longer defend themselves have been tried and convicted by the same people up in Canada, by the way, who told the world that the Freedom Convoy was a hate group, a bunch of Nazis.
I want to be very clear. We are not intimidated by those who hurl insults and abuse at small business workers and steal food from the homeless. We won't give in to those who fly racist flags.
Oh, you're a dictator.
Francis just today came out again, railing against fake news. You see that? Telling Catholics they need to stop with the fake news as he's getting ready to go to Canada on a road show and starring himself. That's all about massive and exposed fake news involving graveyards that don't exist, bodies that don't exist, no evidence whatsoever. But Francis is taking that fake news, taking it all the way to town.
A major part of the Pope's trip to Canada is to apologize for the past conduct of Christians in regard to the treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada. More than 150,000 Native children were forced to attend state-funded Christian schools from 1831 to 1996. The realities of the schools were brought to light last year when the remains of 215 children were found outside of a school in British Columbia. The Pontiff on Sunday saying that this trip is only part of the Church's attempts to right the wrongs of the past.
Well, Candace, this is probably the worst case of fake news that I have ever seen in Canada. Not a single student has been identified. No grave has been identified as belonging to a student. No body has been exhumed. There is actually no evidence at all that these are the graves of students who died at residential school. So there is actually nothing to this story about mass graves or unmarked graves. Until we get some positive evidence, the story should be completely discounted.
Keep in mind as we move through this, they're not just talking about abuse that's the problem with the residential school. But the larger issue here is that what we're really talking about, which is why we're doing such a long program on this tonight, is because what Francis is doing is contributing and endorsing the movement that's been knocking down Christopher Columbus statues down here in the States for how long? A long time. Rewriting history. You know, when he was asked what more the Pope can do after the recent apology in the Vatican, the Canadian flake, Cardinal Michael Cerny, prefect now, he's a very important guy, prefect of the dicastery for promoting integral human development, whatever that means, said, quote, "It's not a matter of doing more, it's a matter of going deeper, Reconciliation requires human encounter, a ceremony, and a liturgy. Now, this is from another lunatic Jesuit, made a cardinal, by the way, by Francis, who's all in, of course, with the Amazon Synod.
Querida Amazonia is a love letter. It's addressed to my beloved Amazonia. And because the Holy Father loves the Amazon, he shares with us his 4 dreams of the Amazon.
So according to the Cardinal over here, Francis is in Canada, is going to be in Canada in a few days, to conduct a liturgical apology for what this Cardinal calls colonialism, racism, and cultural repression. Now we're getting somewhere. You see? Now we're getting somewhere. Remember at the beginning of the show, Francis was going to apologize for the victims of sexual abuse, right? Cardinal here doesn't mention that. The Cardinal is all about colonialism, racism, and cultural repression, you see? And of course, could there be any doubt, the little ferret up in Canada absolutely agrees with the Cardinal.
Mr. Speaker, the ills done to Indigenous people over decades and centuries of colonialism in this country are shameful and are something that we need to learn from and move forward on.
This is a big story. I think we're going to see a lot of scandal. I mean, just consider the magnitude of what we're about to see here. Consider it. I know, we get so used to it. You get punch drunk after a while. But think about it. The vicar of Jesus Christ on earth, supposedly, essentially apologizing. He's going to get the largest stage he can possibly find. He's going to be in an airplane. He's going to have, an entourage. And he's apologizing for those who brought Christ, the Lumen Christi, into the darkness of the pagan world, of the New World. Did you ever think you were going to live to see this? And he's apologizing in the name of alleged abused children, when he himself still has not addressed Archbishop Vigano's charges where Cardinal McCarrick's abuse, massive, systemic abuse in the church is concerned. I will say not one word about that. Remember? That was Francis' response to Vigano. But boy, he's going to get up there quick and he's going to apologize for all these dead heroes, priests and nuns who can't defend themselves. That's Francis. When he himself has still not answered the charges regarding the Father Grassi abuse case. Has he?
Don't be fooled by the cover, which makes you think it's a book. This 2,800-page counter-inquiry is a confidential, internal Argentinian church legal text. Inside, the children are accused of falsifications, lies, deceit, and invention. Even their own sexual orientation is questioned. The conclusion is clear. The court's decision was wrong. Father Grassi had to be acquitted on appeal. One paragraph caught our eye. This work was commissioned in 2010 by the Argentine Episcopal Conference and notably by its then president, Cardinal Bergoglio, now Pope Francis. So the Pope did commission a counter-inquiry to try to have a priest who had been sentenced for pedophilia acquitted.
I wish I could play more of that. I'll put the link below. But I mean, it's just damning evidence. One wonders if this trip to Canada is partly to kind of cover up for some of France's problems, which have recently come to the fore regarding covering up of sexual abuse. Francis was confronted about the Grassi case. Now take a look at this. Does this look like the face of an innocent man?
Sua Santidad, en el caso Grassi, intentando influir a la justicia argentina. Su Santidad, en el caso Grassi, ha intentado influir la justicia argentina. ¿No? Perché pidió este estudio en el caso Gracia. Para nada.
Bottom line, while eager to apologize for the alleged crimes and cover-ups of others, Francis himself refuses to apologize for his own cover-ups.
An Argentine bishop close to Pope Francis has gone back to work at the Vatican despite being under investigation for an alleged sexual abuse. Bishop Gustavo Zanqueta is being investigated in his native Argentina and at the Holy See. Vatican officials say his job at his financial administration office does not interfere with the probes.
Now keep in mind that in 2013, Francis created a new position for this guy in the Vatican. And then he moved this clown, reliably accused of sexual abuse and homosexuality and everything. He moves this clown into his own residence in the Vatican at Santa Marta. Francis does. Literally took him under his wing. Literally provide protection for an egregious abuser who in March of 2022, by the way, was sentenced by an Argentinian court. He got a verdict and sentenced to 4 years and 6 months in prison for sexual abuse. He's in prison now. That story is still unfolding, in fact. And this is not some traditional Catholic run to TV kick. People are talking about it all over the place. For example, The Pillar, not exactly the Remnant. Ed Condon and J.D. Flynn have got an article, I'm going to link right down here below, going into the sordid details of Francis's cover-up of this case. It'll turn your stomach. And of course, you wonder where Francis's apology is for what he did. He's great at apologizing for what others supposedly did. Where's his apology? What's with this guy? Again, friends, were there real victims of abuse in Canada? Probably. I really don't know. And for those that were abused, our heart goes out, our prayers go out. It's never okay. But the problem is, friends, we're talking about Francis here. So this little trip to Canada is not about the abuse victims. It's about Francis. This is part of his globalist agenda to bury the Catholic Church under the Great Reset, the New World Order, to discredit the Catholic Church, to shut it down, to besmirch it, to wreck it, to ruin it, to deface Mother Church. That's what he's good at. And that's what he's doing. And right now it makes me sick that just as he did in Rome with the Amazon Synod, bring on the feathers, literally had these poor folks dress in the feathers as if they run around at home in the feathers. Of course they don't. Why is this not racism? Bring your feathers, because we're trying to make a point. The white guys in the Vatican, we want to make a point, so bring the feathers. Am I the only one that's nauseated by this? Francis is using the Indigenous peoples once again to push his agenda. When he had the Indigenous Canadians come to the Vatican a few months ago, what do you know? They came again, decked out in their feathers. Just as he did in the Amazon Synod. Bring the feathers. Do you know what, friends? Apologies are popular these days. So maybe tonight we'd like to close this show with an apology of our own. I, Michael Matt, as a faithful Catholic, I would like to say that I am sorry for the scandalous exploitation of Indigenous peoples everywhere, from Canada to the Amazon, and for the sexual abuse cover-ups for which Pope Francis is personally responsible. I am embarrassed, mortified, humiliated, ashamed of this man, and I apologize for him as a practicing Catholic. And may God have mercy on his soul.